The red, which is cultural destructiveness, where we force people to assimilate to the dominant culture. Think of this as something where in many cultures, it's appropriate to wear head coverings, and forcing one to remove a head covering would be a form of cultural destructiveness. Look at yellow, cultural blindness. This is the sentiment that everyone should be treated the same. And this is a little bit like the insurrection of the term all lives matter over the summer. If a husband came home to a wife in distress who was saying she was having a terrible day, and she just really needed to be reassured that he loved her, and he turned around and said, honey, of course you know, I love everyone. In the moment, he would be being really insensitive and hurtful, even though the statement may be true. And so cultural blindness, that all lives matter, in a moment where Black people were making an attempt to display how much police brutality has gone on, was culturally insensitive. And it's a form of incompetency. It's to the left side, towards the red side of what we're looking at in cultural competence. As we move towards cultural competence and cultural proficiency, we recognize people of different cultures seek advice from different people, hire culturally different, unbiased staff, make changes to improve bias, and become aware of our biases. Like Jeanette mentioned, what the organization is doing to bring attention and to highlight the needs of diverse groups. In order to understand the impact of culture, we need to understand what oppression is. And oppression is the harmful experience of exclusion of some, but not others, based on their status rather than their merit. And I'm going to define these terms, and even in preparing for this, it really strikes me. If we think about what is culture, culture is a shared values, beliefs, language, rituals, and traditions. They're passed on behaviors from one generation to the next. Culture is truly a socially construed phenomenon. Then let's define ethnicity. And ethnicity in the United States, it looks something like checking a box. Are you American Indian, Asian, Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latino, Pacific Islander, white, or other? This is how we understand ethnicity in America. And yet what ethnicity really is it's belonging to a shared social group. And it doesn't have any biological marker. There's no biological markers associated with ethnicity. And what ethnicity really serves to do is to mask power and privilege by confounding it with race. So next I'm going to define race. And race is grouping of humans, is a socially construed grouping of humans based on their physical and social attributes. So we started to define race with speaking a common language. And then it began to note national affiliation. In the 17th century, it started to focus more on skin color. So culture, ethnicity, and race are all socially construed phenomena. That is, they are categories made up by people to group others. The UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, declared race a myth in 1950. The mapping of the human genome has proven that race is a myth. In 1998, the American Anthropological Association identified the same. And in 2003, my own organization, the American Psychological Association, adopted this sentiment as well, which is these are socially construed, not fact-based or biologically based terms that we use in our society to continue to promote hierarchies. And in the hierarchies, there is a minority and there are people of power. The minority is not necessarily people who are less in number factually. They are groups of people that have less power. And that's in comparison to people of privilege. People of privilege have unearned power that's afforded to others and not some on the basis of status, not merit. And status is usually divided among culture, ethnicity, and race, these human construed groupings. Privilege occurs not in a system where people are desiring the privilege, but it's founded on one group's power over the other. One benefit of white privilege is not experiencing racism, which we know has detrimental effects on our physical and emotional well-being. It's not, as a white individual, I didn't choose to have privilege, but I must recognize that I exist within a system that affords it to me. Racism is the belief in the superiority of one's own race, and it can be subtle and not so subtle. We've seen a lot of not so subtle racism recently, but the subtle ways that we see it are in the structural ways that it's maintained, and what we're seeing and how COVID's playing out, with people of color dying twice as often as people of privilege. It highlights the economic disparities in our society. I do want to spend a few minutes, since it is Black History Month, just covering some of the relevant spaces in history where in 1619, the first slaves are documented to be brought into Virginia. This is hundreds of years into the slave trade, where the vast majority of African slaves were taken to Brazil and had terrible living conditions, with about 400,000 ending up in the United States between 1700 and 1866. Now, in 1793, Congress said you can't even, it's a federal crime to assist somebody, a slave trying to escape. 100 years later, Congress outlawed enslaving new people. And in the 50 years following, after it became outlawed to enslave new people, slavery tripled in the United States. So think about that. And by 1860, we had nearly 4 million slaves in the United States. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing 3 million slaves. And this is his quote: "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as for punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." So it's interesting, and I highlighted and italicized, except as a punishment for a crime. Because what happens in 1863, while he abolishes slavery, and it takes 2 full years for the 13th Amendment to pass, what it does is create a new form of slavery, and that's our prison system today. And I'll talk a little bit about how that evolves. But for a great Netflix movie, The 13th is a great show that highlights how our prison system is functioning as intended and is the next step in slavery. Juneteenth, who learned about Juneteenth in school? I know I didn't learn about Juneteenth in school, but Juneteenth is Emancipation Day. It's when the slaves in Texas finally found out they were officially free to leave. But along with the emancipation of slavery, the Jim Crow laws begin. And then we have separate but equal in our world. And what that means is, and Supreme Court endorses this, it says, absolutely, we have separate but equal. So you can have a different school, and we'll call it equal. Maybe your building's dilapidated and you get taught different things, or your teachers aren't as educated, but we call that separate but equal. And what separate but equal does is it allows for disparities to be ingrained into the legal system of how information is and privilege are passed along. As Black America starts to gain some power, you see in 1908, businessmen in Springfield, Illinois, burned down Black buildings, Black businesses. It happens again in Tulsa, Oklahoma, not very long after. And interestingly enough, with Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Tulsa massacre, the Black Wall Street massacre, I think a lot of people heard about that this past summer, but that didn't even really show up into light into our history until 1966 in the Oklahoma bombing, when attention was able to come to the Black Wall Street massacre. And so it shows just how groomed and cleaned our history books have been of relevant Black information. The race riots of 1919, called the Red Summer. So there was a lot of violence towards Blacks. Lynchings weren't declared a federal crime until 2018. That is less than 5 years ago. And in the 100 years before that, over 4,000 lynchings took place without legal authority, predominantly killing of Black people. So there's been condoned violence towards Blacks throughout history. In 1972, the year after I was born, I'm dating myself, the United States Public Health Department finally ended the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Tuskegee was a historically Black college, and they had been doing experiments where they were denying Black men with syphilis treatment to see what would happen with unchecked and untreated syphilis. This went on for 40 years, and they went to great lengths to prevent these men from receiving treatment, which resulted in death of their children, transmission to spouses, and death of participants. In our recent years, we've had riots in the streets when police officers are found guilty for killing Rodney King. We've had some gains. We had Colin Powell as our first Secretary of State and President Obama as our first Black president. And now we have Kamala Harris as our first female and Black and person of Indian descent vice president. But there is still such a long way to go. We had the death of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd last year that led to a great outcry and highlighting of the police brutality. Can you believe it's been 5 years since Colin Kaepernick took a knee on the field, and what difficulty he got following that for trying to speak up about his experience of oppression? So the history is so relevant to understanding what's happening now and how it's ingrained in our society. And this is backwards. And it's really important that we understand how systemic racism occurs and where it occurs. And I want to go over some experience of it, some statistics related to it. In our education system, Black children make up 18% of all preschoolers and represent 50% of preschool suspensions. Think about that. This is how early it starts, that as early as preschool, we are imposing these beliefs on children of color. When Black and white students commit similar infractions, Black students are suspended at 3 times the rate of white students. Black students make up 16% of student enrollment and represent 27% of students referred to law enforcement and 31% of students subjected to arrest. There is a school to prison pipeline that is going on. 64% of white students graduate from four-year colleges versus 40% of Black students. Black students take on more debt and have twice the unemployment rate after graduation as their white counterpart. One of the factors contributing to household wealth disparity is student loans. 82% of our teachers are white. The people who are deciding what we watch and see on TV are 93% white. The people who decide what news will be viewed are 85% white. In our occupations, the average unemployment rate is 13.3% for whites and 16.8% for Black Americans. Black males and females have lower life expectancy than white counterparts. Black people of color, especially Black Americans, are severely underrepresented at the top of corporate hierarchies. In 2018, just a few years ago, the Black worker earned 62% of what the average white worker made. The overall income for Black Americans was 42% lower than that of whites in 2018. The poverty rate for Blacks is twice that of whites. In our healthcare, I mentioned Blacks have lower life expectancies. They're twice as likely to lack health insurance. They have higher rates of diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease, higher than rates of all other groups, and those illnesses have been associated with systemic racism. They have a 500% higher death rate from asthma than white children, 500% higher. They're much less likely to survive prostate, breast, and lung cancer than their white counterparts. They make up 17.7% of the population and account of 23% of COVID-related deaths. I heard recently that in New York, more non-New Yorkers were able to get the vaccine in New York than people of color combined. The average life expectancy of an affluent white neighborhood in Bethesda, Maryland, is 10 years higher than people of a predominantly Black neighborhood in Southeast Washington, D.C., 10 miles away. 10 years difference. Black women die 3 times more frequently giving birth. In our political system, systemic racism exists. 90% of our Congress is white. If poll taxes were imposed, Black people are targeted with fear tactics to keep them out of the polls. This election cycle, people of color in particular were targeted by misinformation campaigns about how they could click to submit their vote via text. And it found a significant number of votes actually went to those texts. In 2017, Native Americans, Latinos, and African Americans were 2, 3, and 4 times respectively more likely than their white counterparts to say they experienced racial discrimination when trying to vote or participate in politics. Felony disenfranchisement is an example of systemic racism. In 2018, the Supreme Court even gave a thumbs up to sustaining some of the Jim Crow laws of voter purging, which is if someone doesn't vote in an election year, they can purge them off their polls. And these are known tactics to have voter suppression, which is part of systemic racism because these tactics are directed disproportionately to people of color. Gerrymandering is another example of political systemic racism. In our legal system, Black prisoners are overrepresented. Between the ages of 19 and 20, so think about this is the age where someone graduates high school. Black males are 13 times more likely to enter the prison system than their white counterparts. Remember what I said about the school to prison pipeline. We're taking kids from schools basically and exposing them to prison. Marijuana rates we know are similar between Blacks and whites, and yet Black Americans are more than 3 times more likely to get arrested on marijuana possession charges. In the last 20 years, while decriminalization has gone up, the incarceration of Blacks for marijuana related charges has also gone up. The Black imprisonment rate for drug offenses is 6 times higher than whites. Black men are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a white male. Black people are overwhelmingly more likely to be under parole and sent back to prison for minor infractions, 4 times and 7 times more likely. And then systemic racism occurs in our economic systems. White families have nearly 10 times the net worth of Black families. White minority homeownership lags behind, Black minority homeownership lags behind whites. Black people and people of color have harder times getting mortgages. Banks in 2008 and again in 2017 with Wells Fargo targeted people of color for the high-risk subprime mortgages. Everyone knows about Wells Fargo in 2017 inventing people and creating false accounts, but not as many people know that those were immigrants and people of color that were primarily targeted in those situations. The poverty rate for whites is 8.7% and for Blacks is 21.2%. And so at all of these different intersections of life, racism is promoted. And in order to be culturally competent, it requires us to be sensitive to cross-cultural differences, to be aware of the influence of ethnicity, race, power, and privilege, to be aware of the intersectionality of all of that. And what does that mean? All of us are positioned in socially created categories. I'm a woman, I'm a psychologist, I'm a mother. And all of those realities are pathways that I am on. And some of them hold power and some of them have privilege, while some are also oppression. And so looking at how privilege and oppression interact is the concept of intersectionality, and understanding where you're coming from in relation to where others is coming from is critical in being culturally competent. Being able to adapt, having an open discussion and understanding of where others are coming from, communicating with respect and appreciation, with a genuine desire to understand about the differences and strengths associated with that differences, with reflection on how your own cultural norms impact how you view others, with attention to social justice, with respect for positionality, which is understanding where you are in relation to race, ethnicity, and your statuses, actively trying to negotiate the systemic processes and the hierarchy of power. As a person of privilege, you have greater power in the ability to change the system. To increase your own cultural competence, talk openly about systemic racism. Study historical events. Ask open questions. Practice openness. Seek out diverse friends. Visit a relative museum or monument. Ask a friend or person of color to share their experiences about racism. Participate in anti-racist training programs. Thank you for joining this today. Support Black-owned businesses. You can even click on that on Amazon now. Don't be silent when you see racism. Silence is support. Check out Black movies. Demonstrate humility. Partner with Black organizations. Expose your children to diversity. Look around your organization. What cultures are represented and which are excluded? What kinds of relationships are already established among cultural groups? I love that Jeanette mentioned the LGBTQ groups, people of color. How well are the different cultural groups organized? How well are the conflicts between groups openly recognized and talked about? Think about if there have been efforts to strengthen alliances among groups. Really, this summer, as we saw a great alliance between the Black Lives Matter movement and the LGBTQ community as they frequently came out to protest and support together. What values and concerns do the different cultural groups have in common? Does the leadership model cultural openness? How can we welcome members of our organization to discuss their cultural concerns and needs? And I've included a variety of resources for you to consider. Jeanette has a copy of the deck, and I'd love to open it up to questions or comments.
Yeah, Dr. Lisa, hopefully you can. This is Jeanette. I think that this is a very powerful testament to what, I initially said when we started this discussion, is that I am so proud that this organization, fosters an environment that allows this type of dialogue to happen, because many organizations don't. And, it's a slippery slope. And, sometimes you need to be reminded of statistics, to have that reality kind of slap you in the face and and say, wow, we work for an organization where executive leadership really does support this. And as I said, we've created internal mechanisms, and areas for us to have these conversations outside of your seminars and the wellness program. We have established an eye care department. We've got groups in our We community that really foster this type of understanding. And, I think this is just my humble opinion. I think that, when people avoid these discussions, that just perpetuates this level of ignorance to continue. And, I'm hoping that we can continue having this type of dialogue moving forward, in a healthy and not intimidating type of a atmosphere. I think people may be a little bit apprehensive to express how they feel because of all of the things that you just talked about, all of the statistics, and there's fear, there's fear there. And, I know these things don't change overnight, but I certainly think that this is a very, very good step in a very positive direction for us as an organization. Let's forget about the rest of the world. Let Wells Fargo and these other companies do what they're going to do. But Bank United, ironically, has a very diverse workforce, and we pride ourselves on this type of education, because that's really what it is it's just opening the door to listening to, like you said, I have friends with all different backgrounds, and I do ask questions. If I don't understand something, I don't make an assumption. I will ask a question, and say, what is this like? What does it feel like for you? And it really does help shed light on that. So, I am really happy that we're touching on some things that may make us uncomfortable to discuss, and that's okay. I think the more we do it, the more comfortable we will become in having this dialogue as part of who we are as an organization. So I thank you for, again, just kind of making us squirm in our chairs a little bit. Sometimes that's where change happens. Again, I would encourage people to share if they are comfortable doing that. But I would like to get your take on where do you see, the statistics are grim. And when you listen to that, it makes me feel kind of hopeless. And I wonder what your take is on, how do we as an organization or even as individuals, what steps can we take to move out of that path and just kind of change the trajectory of how we, how we're viewing these things? Any advice for us organizationally?
Yeah, I think really just having these types of things, opening up the dialogue, creating a space where it's safe to talk about that, where there's even a recognition where you examine in positions of power, is there a disproportionate representation? And how do we address that? How do we look to promote diversity within the organization in a healthy way and hear those voices? So I think keeping it just an ongoing dialogue and looking for those strengths, it is a process, but it takes everyone really being open to discussing it, acknowledging that it exists to change the dynamic.
It's interesting, as you were talking about a lot of those statistics. I've always considered myself, ethnically diverse, and that I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, and I was the only child in the neighborhood that had slanty eyes and coarse dark hair because my mom was Japanese and my dad was French. So I don't compare it to racism, but I understand what it's like to be beat up and picked on and, just wanting to be and look different, because I was so fearful of who I was. And I didn't even understand it as a kid, when other children were blaming, me for Pearl Harbor. I didn't even know what Pearl Harbor was. So I kind of get a small kind of, and believe me, I'm not minimizing the Black experience, but I'm just saying from my perspective, like, that's a really terrible feeling to have, especially as a child. And I would never wish that on anyone. And, I hope that that we have the ability as adults and as an organization to, to have this conversation with kids and learn, what it is that they may be struggling and dealing with. Because I know as a kid, it was really difficult for me. And I am considered, for all intents and purposes, that privileged, individual. But for a while there, I wanted to be anything but who I was. So, I just wanted to share that, because as you were talking about that, I'm like, man, I remember those days, and I just hated being Japanese. And I made up any excuse in the world. I used to say I was Egyptian. I used to say I was, anything but Japanese, because I didn't want to get beat up or picked on. So it's really interesting that you just kind of brought me back to those days, and I'm sure everybody has their own story about having an experience like that can be very humbling. But I will tell you, as a grown woman now, it has really shaped how I interact with other people. And because of those experiences, I just don't view, my friends are all different colors and religions and by choice, because I feel that I relate better to people that have a diverse background. So I really encourage, people stepping outside their comfort zone and asking questions and building friendships and relationships with people that are different. I wanted to just share that with you, because you touched on a nerve there.
Hey, Jeanette,
Thanks.
can I say something? The way I think about this is, in the microcosm of the bank, right? There are 1,500 people all on their separate life journeys. And I think the idea that we individually have felt marginalized for whatever reason at points in our life are things that you have to draw from if you're going to make things better, right? It's what I think about is, like, I'm on my path to enlightenment, working on it, right? But everyone, for whatever reason, may not be as open today to have the discussion, right? So I think, we may have to meet that person a month from now when they're open to having that discussion, or 2 months from now, that ultimately the goal of iCare is to structure an environment where everyone at the bank is welcome, kind of regardless of what it is, right? But I say it repeatedly, journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right? We're taking steps. One step will move forward. I'm sure at points we may move backwards, kind of thing. But if we're having these discussions, if people are open to discussions, if people are honest with each other, honest with themselves, then I think we can move things forward. And then ultimately, if we can create a template within our microcosm of 1,500 people at the bank, it may be something that we can transfer out to the larger society. That's been our goal from the start, and we continue to kind of push along that pathway. All right, I didn't mean to totally
Thank
get on
you.
the soapbox there, but
No. It was a great box. Thank you.
No. All right. So I guess back to the idea of how do you operationalize a lot of what you just discussed. It feels like it's kind of small group discussions that we're doing. We actually currently have going on at the bank with the YWCA a 21-day challenge where we're going to get some of this going, but kind of the long term in other institutions, how long does it take, I guess, is really my long-winded way of getting to like When do you start seeing change, and how long does it take?
You know, it's interesting because I think when we think about change, it's always occurring. And in the moment when it's occurring, you don't necessarily see it until it's in the
Mhm.
rearview mirror. And the frequency with which these discussions are occurring on all levels, even at the national level, I think does highlight that we are in the process of change. I continue to try and be hopeful, but I really do think on the smallest and personal level, it's that openness. It's saying to your friend, what has been your experience of racism while you've worked here? You know, even just understanding what that might look like to your coworker provides value to all of us in being able to make and modify it in small ways to help others feel more comfortable and empowered in their space.
In, but the broader question is, it is just that, right? How do you keep one person, whether by omission or commission, from making the other person uncomfortable, right? And racism is certainly part of it, but the expanse is a lot of different areas, right? From, whether it be immigrants or women or whomever, right? Like that, I, you know, the feeling is kind of the same if you're on the other end of it, right?
Sure. I think by developing the alliances among groups, that it empowers the opportunity to say, you know what, that's not cool. Or, hey, I don't know if you realized when you did this in the meeting, but it really sent the signal of superiority or reinforced some of the systemic racism that we have. And so being willing to have the conversations one-on-one and build the comfort as you move up into conversations through hierarchy of power. I don't think there's a great easy answer to it, but
Right.
it certainly comes with openness to dialogue.
So I think essentially people on the Zoom call here, right, are already people who are interested. How do you, what are the strategies to drive to the people who are not interested in change?
Sure. So facts like we shared today, right? Like taking it out and sharing information that stuck with you today. Did you realize that in preschool already, kids are 3 times more likely to get suspended? Our little Black kids, it's already happening in preschool. So just sharing the information that you have in small little bites that can make an impact to help open people's minds, or pointing it out when you see it in the environment and
Right.
a coworker didn't join this call, sharing about the call. Hey, did you get to join the cultural competency call? It's on recording, check it out. There was some good information there. Or other things about the eye care. Hey, we've got this really great group going on. Stop by and see. So spreading the word sort of in the grassroots way with how all movements start, how the civil rights movement has started and got its power is through spreading the word. And unfortunately, it's a lot of times gets catalyst when there are setbacks and wrongs. And we see that throughout history, when people have been wrong, just like we did this summer with the many unfortunate deaths that I mentioned that served as a catalyst to put this conversation in a greater light and more on the forefront.
Got it. Thanks.
So I think especially when you see things in the organization that support the systemic forms of racism is the most important time to go out on a ledge and point it out and talk about it.
Courage at the point of attack.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to make a comment about that too. And at least Dr. Lisa, I think that it's critically important. Consistency is the key. And, I sort of tie everything and compare it to exercise because I'm such a fitness freak. But, you can't work out once and get buff, right? You can't go running once and go to run the marathon. This is no different. This is like a mental and emotional exercise that we have to practice daily. And I think the more opportunities, I'm giving myself goosebumps, by the way, right now, because it's so true. Like, this is an opportunity for us to keep the dialogue going. And I think the more often we have dialogue like this, now, some of these folks on this call may jump over to iCare and get involved, and tell another colleague, maybe that should be our mission for the 40 people on the call right now. Let's reach out to a colleague and share this information. It's really great information. Our company is supporting an initiative that's going to bring us closer and just, have a better understanding. And it's going to be less restrictive. It's going to be an environment that fosters communication on a level that makes us just better people. And guess what? When you're a better person, it makes everything else better. You're professionally, personally, financially, I really think it's an opportunity for us to consistently keep this dialogue going. And that's why when we started this call, I said that I hope that this would be the start of many conversations, that cultural competency is something we could talk about once a month, once a week, probably for, indefinitely. And I do think that the more we get this going, the more consistent it is, the more people are going to join into this movement, because that's what it is. It's a movement within the organization. And I think it's so incredibly important that, that we have, like Eric, executive leadership is supporting this initiative. I mean, this is brilliant. It's an opportunity for everybody to get involved. And I understand the intimidation factor. I understand the apprehension, and I understand those small amount of people that, it's the ones that are going to be the ones that are resistant or hesitant or not interested initially, those are the people that we really want to touch, and reach, not change, just reach. There's a big difference. So, again, Eric, of course, I'm your biggest fan, but, I think that, having executive leadership support these efforts and show up is what makes it work. And, Dr. Lisa, I will tell you that, Mr. Hibbert is one of our senior executive leadership folks, and he's been spearheading these much needed initiatives, not just with cultural competency, but, in terms of getting, women's groups organized within the bank. I mean, it's been amazing. And, when I had an opportunity to jump on his coattails and sail along and support it, that's when I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk during Black History Month about cultural competency. And I would really have another discussion about this again. I think it's very relevant. I don't think that you can talk too much about it. And I think that it can really lead to some great opportunities for us to really grow the other areas, within the Bank United organization that focus on just this very topic. So I thank you both for adding value here in this discussion. I'm wondering if anyone else would like to share or comment.
Hi, Janet. Yes, if I may comment. And hello, everybody that is in this call. I'm Angelica Coronel. I think I'm the newest member in Bank United. Today is my 4th day. But Janet, I really want to
introduce Angelica is
Yes.
our iCare program manager. We found her out in academia, but she's been at the bank and just doing great stuff, since she got here.
Thank you very much, Eric. So I want to start by saying thank you to Janet as well for opening this space. And I want to second what she said about the importance of opening these spaces and building an organizational climate of trust and openness. It's really essential for what we're seeking to do here in the bank. As we have been discussing, this is not a one-time event or one-time effort. This is really embedding values of diversity and inclusion in our culture. It's going to be part of who we are, right? That whenever we think about diversity and inclusion, it needs to go from hiring to recruiting to maintaining talent and to building a sense of belongingness. This has been a passion of mine for the last 6 years. And I think that the bank is at a outstanding space where they're truly seeking to build that inclusion and that belongingness in the bank. So I'm really excited to see that you are opening these safe spaces for discussion. This is essential and much needed. And like one of my favorite philosophers said, James Baldwin says that not everything that we face can be changed, but nothing can be changed until we face it, right? So I think we are at this point where we're facing what's happening, not only inside the bank, but also in our communities, and then doing the best that we can to change the status quo and then just welcome everybody into this beautiful team. So thank you so much again for doing this.
Thank you for sharing, and I'm so glad you joined the call. I was hoping you would. It's great to have you here, and Dr. Lisa is one of our experts, and she serves, in the capacity that she speaks on a number of very relevant topics monthly, and she's been a value add for several years now. And, I thought that it was relevant. It was actually her suggestion to, use Black History Month to really kind of bring all of this together and focus on spearheading this initiative and just, keeping it fueled with passion and with really what we are trying to do as an organization. So, Dr. Lisa, it's interesting. You've had an opportunity to get to know some of the players in these areas of diversity and inclusion and eye care. And, I'm wondering, what is your take on how Bank United is, choosing to approach not just this topic, but this very important movement and making this a part of our culture organizationally? I mean, I'd like to just kind of get your take on that.
So I'm so impressed because from the time I met you, you did tell me that Bank United was focused on wellness. And in the years that I've been doing this, I've really seen that bear out to be true. And I don't think that we can have a focus on wellness without attending to what's happening in our communities at large. And this issue is central to wellness. And so I think that it really does add to what you've said all along, that there is an inherent focus on having well employees and the recognition that in doing so, the bank grows its own strength through caring for its workforce. And I've just seen that to be true. And I'm really impressed and very thankful to be able to be helping through that process of sharing wellness.
That's great. I really appreciate your advice. And it's because of having subject matter experts like you in my corner that we're able to bring in, D&I experts and wellness experts. There are not many organizations that specifically employ people to manage these departments. We're not vendors. We're part of, we're in the trenches with the employees. We're part of the family. And I think that makes a huge difference in how we develop and maintain the momentum of these types of initiatives and whether or not they're successful. Because I have a vested interest, because I'm part of the family. You know what I mean? I want my family to be happy, healthy, and, as you said, the idea of wellness encompasses so many things, and fitness is just a tiny part of it. I think people are realizing now that we've got so many things that we offer on this menu of wellness services, and now we add to it the diversity and inclusion and the eye care platform and the we groups and all of the communities that we're developing to focus on not just mental health, but spiritual health, emotional health, financial health. There's so many pillars that we're trying to, build this foundation on so that it's strong. It's not just one pillar, it's several. And I think that's where Bank United has made the right decision in choosing to embrace many different ideas and many different ways to approach a healthy workforce, because it is more than just the physical. And I think some of the things that we've spoken about in the past several years, Dr. Lisa, really evidence that, we're trying to bring people what they really need. And as I said early in this discussion, sometimes it will be uncomfortable. Sometimes you will have a conversation with somebody that has an opposing point of view. And I think that if we foster an environment like we have, that's a safe place. It's a healthy dialogue that we should be able to have about these things that help us grow as not just employees, but as people. We are still people, even though we're part of the Bank United family. We're all people, human beings. And, I wasn't sure what the nature of the discussion was going to be when you started with the statistics, but, I have to tell you that hearing those statistics and the numbers really just kind of, I don't know, like it took me back a little bit. And I almost feel ignorant that a lot of those things I was unaware of myself. And, I'm a fairly educated individual, and, I pride myself on being well-rounded. But again, sometimes you need that dose of reality to remind you, wow, this is really happening now. This is not something we're talking about that's 100 years ago. This is now. It's relevant now, today. So I would love us to have and revisit the subject of cultural competence and maybe put a different spin on it, because I think that we can continue these discussions and dialogue indefinitely. So this was a great start. Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to the chat and to what Eric said earlier, which is to join the 21-day racial equity challenge and to check out the iCare page. I think that that's really a great initiative and allows the attention to stay on this matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, again, every time we have these discussions with you, they add tremendous value, and they will continue to do so. And I think our responsibility for those of us that are here is to share this with people, not to impose our views, or, it's not about making someone feel guilty that they didn't join, but just saying, hey, this is a really cool discussion that we had, and I didn't know that we have these things available within the bank. Did you know that? That's sometimes all it takes to get people involved. And it's our responsibility. We do have that responsibility, I think, socially, to reach out to people and to create this kind of awareness. It's no different than having people get health screenings or get their blood pressure checked or get their mammograms, right? This is no different. This is no different. So it's fitness for the mind. And I think that if we get that in check, it really aligns all of those other areas that make us really, well-rounded folks. So, again, in the interest of time, I would like to wrap up, but I do think this is a really important conversation, and I'm so glad that Eric and Angelica were on the call today. It's always a pleasure to have you, Lisa, because you tend to touch on topics that are not just relevant, but sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's good to squirm in the seat a little bit, and sometimes that's what it takes to get you to stand up and do something about something. So I thank you for your continued, enlightenment and your passion for what you do in the community and for the bank. You were just, you're a keeper, that's for sure. So,
thank you.
Yeah, we love you. I do anyway. And, again, to Eric and Angelica for just spearheading initiatives within the organization that are just really awesome. And I hope that people open their minds and their hearts to this kind of thing, because it's really what we need to do. People, we need each other. That at the end of the day, we all need each other. And the world is a much better place when we're on each other's side, So be the change that you want to see, right? So I would definitely encourage anybody who wants a copy of this deck or the recording, let me know. I will make it available as soon as it's polished, and I'll upload it on the intranet. And Lisa, same with you. Please let me know if you would like it. And, you know, again, we're going to revisit this discussion in the very near future. And any last comments, Eric or Angelica? I'll open it up to you before we wrap up.
I would just say, well, there's, you know, Jeanette, you continue to be one of my favorite people. You just are. So I thank you for putting this together and for reminding me this morning so I could dial in and actually be part of this. Lisa, thank you very much. The information is timely, it's well worth it. You know, I think the point of continuing to drive forward, right? Intellectually, at this point, we've got a lot of ideas, right? So now, how do we get it from kind of the top of the house into the organization all the way down, right? The point isn't that the executive team kind of decides we're going to be this. It is, you know, we've got to get to the point where everyone, the next employee that joins, right, you know, wherever you are on the food chain at the bank, that you feel the same thing that we're trying to define at the top of the house. And, you know, our work, Angelica's work, the iCare's work, you know, I would include in that community development, you know, and that whole team. The work is to get to the point where everyone is pulling in the same direction, right? So if we can get that, that'd be a beautiful thing. I think, you know, I think about it as new technology, right? You know, we've got kind of early adopters and we're kind of moving through the acceptance phase, right? And we'll get to a point where we're kind of past the idea of this is just natural at the bank and this is what we do. And having conversations, honest conversations, is just a Bank United trait, right? That's where we want to get to. So I know, interest of time, Jeanette, love you, thank you. This was great. Thank you very much.
I'm so glad. And, you know, you can say all the nice things you want about me publicly in front of everyone so that, you know, it really makes me glow for the rest of the day. But, you know, I'll tell you, this discussion is going to leave me feeling really good and motivated for the rest of the day. And I'm hoping that everybody that joined has sort of that same kind of lighter feeling in their heart. You know, it's great that you all took the time to do this, and even better that we had executive leadership here, and we also had Angelica here to support Dr. Lisa's discussion. And, you know, we're going to keep this ball rolling, and we're a family, so we have to take care of one another. So, you know, Dr. Lisa, thank you so much. And, you know, we look forward to having you back again, and we will definitely talk offline about other, you know, culturally competent topics that we can discuss. And I'll circle back with our D&I expert and Eric on maybe what direction we want to go with those discussions. But I think there's an opportunity here for us. And, you know, for everyone on the call, thank you again. Please check out iCare and reach out to me if you're interested in receiving a copy of the deck or the recording. And we are wrapping up 1 minute late, so I do apologize for that. But I want to wish you all a wonderful day. And, you know, let me know if there's anything else I can do for you from a wellness perspective.